Well, let me just say it's hard to address any other subject given the senseless tragedy in Charleston earlier today. Our sympathies go out to the families of those who've been killed, to the members of the church. It's a very, very tragic day for South Carolina and for the nation. On another subject that involves a good bit of good news, the NDAA just passed with only 25 no votes. Chairman McCain is here. This is an extraordinary accomplishment for our country, and it looks like this is a bill that can actually become law. And so I want to turn it over to Senator McCain with our gratitude for the incredible job he did both in committee, where only 4 Democrats voted against it, and on the floor where only 25 people expressed their opposition. Senator McCain.
First, I want to thank Senator McConnell, our leader, for scheduling this bill on the floor of the Senate. It's the earliest that it's been in many years, and it is also the first time in several years that actual amendment debate and votes have taken place on this important legislation. I know of no more important legislation than that concerns the defense of our nation and the men and women who serve it. This legislation is a reform bill, first and foremost. Acquisition reform, headquarters and management reform, military retirement reform, and personnel reform. There are fundamental changes made in the way that the Pentagon does business, our retirement system, and I think will go a long way in restoring the American people's confidence that their tax dollars are not wasted or mismanaged. Briefly, acquisition reform, we put the services back into the acquisition process, created new mechanisms to ensure accountability for results, streamlined education, and opened up the defense acquisition process to our nation's innovators. Military reform modernized and improved our military retirement system. Today, 83% of service members leave the service with no retirement assets. Under this plan, 75% of service members would get benefits. On management reform, we ensure that the Department of Defense and the military services are using precious defense dollars to fulfill their missions, not expand their bloated staffs. And believe me, their staffs have become bloated while the active military combat forces have been reduced. This requires a 30% reduction in headquarters and staffs over 4 years, a 30% reduction which would save $1.7 billion in 1 year alone. There are many other aspects of this bill. As you've seen, it's a very big piece of legislation. I was proud to see that there was 75 votes in favor of the legislation. I look forward to the conference, and I would also point out one other provision in this bill, and that is the prohibition of mistreatment of prisoners is now required throughout the federal government, not just the uniformed military. Those provisions in the Uniform Code of Military Justice on prohibition of torture will apply to all agencies of government. So I want to thank Senator Harry Reid. This was conducted in a bipartisan fashion, and I'm hopeful we get this into law in this very difficult and challenging time for our nation's defense.
Well, the kinder, gentler John McCain thanking Senator Reid for not voting for the bill and 25 of them not voting for the defense bill just shows how forward-leaning he is to try to get this work done. And apparently the vote we are just taking, no Democrats will now vote to move to the bill that funds the priorities that the Congress, that the Senate just set. Defending the country, the number one priority of the government. The amount of money that the Appropriations Committee for Defense suggested we spend is the amount of money the President asked for. It's an amount of money that is allowed in the Budget Control Act, which anticipated that there would be times when an equal spending between defense and everything else the government does would no longer be appropriate. And in a dangerous world, there's nothing in the Defense Appropriations Bill that violates anything that would allow us to move forward. Now, our friends, the Democrats, constantly want to talk about being for or against the sequester. The Budget Control Act and the sequester are two very different things. And if we stay within the limits in these other bills of the Budget Control Act, there is no sequester. There's no line-by-line cutting. The amount of money that the president asked for defense is provided for in the bill, and the amount of money that the law allows for everything else is provided for in the bills that the committees are bringing to the floor. To hold defense hostage, later I assume to hold veterans and military construction hostage, because somehow we've discovered that no matter what the worldwide situation is, there has to be equity in spending, is outrageous. And to hold back this work, to not let the defense bill go forward or the other appropriating bills come to the floor for the first time in years. In the 5 years of Senator Reid's leadership, there could have been 60 appropriations bills on the Senate floor. There were 3. People's work, 3/60th of the time is the batting average for the Senate led by Senator Reid. They now want to continue with that process of not letting bills come to the floor, because apparently we think on the minority side of the Senate now that letting people have debate on how to spend the money is a bad idea, not a good idea. Passing the defense bill, great accolades to Chairman McCain for everything he did to get that done, but funding the defense bill now becomes equally important. Setting your priorities don't mean much if you're not willing to follow through with your priorities, and that's what the vote on the Senate floor was just about.
And as we speak, the motion to proceed to the Department of Defense appropriations bill is going down on a party line vote. I met with a group of soldiers in my office this morning who talked about vehicles that they can't fuel, about weapons that they can't fire, about training they can't complete because of a refusal by obstructionists to come to solutions in a bipartisan fashion that we are attempting to do with this defense spending bill. Tomorrow I'm going to be visiting Buckley Air Force Base in Colorado. 6 military installations. We have the Air Force Academy. At Buckley Air Force Base tomorrow, I'm going to deliver a simple message to them tomorrow, that while we voted in a bipartisan fashion to pass a Defense Authorization Act, they refused to provide the funding necessary to stand up and do what's right for this country. I thank Chairman McCain for his leadership today, but there is more work to do, and I hope that the fight the obstructionists have put in place today can end with a bipartisan solution to do what's right for our troops, to do what's right for men and women in uniform, to do what's right for the defense of this country. And I thank Chairman McCain for getting us to this point, but clearly we have more work to do as defense the motion to proceed goes down in a party line vote.
Questions?
Well, you'd have to ask the leader that. He's, as we well know from watching Senator Reid run the floor for a long time, only the majority leader brings bills to the floor. But these bills are coming out of the Appropriations Committee. The Interior Committee today marked up the first bill before the full committee in 5 years. It's time for these bills to be on the floor, and certainly my advice to Senator McConnell would be to continue to bring the bills to the floor, let the minority stand in the way of debating the bills and funding the government, and I hope that's what he does.
Could I just mention, I want to thank Senator Jack Reed, who is the ranking member, for all his cooperation and effort on behalf of getting the authorization bill done. Go ahead.
What do you see as the main objectives of such how can be resolved from the House and Senate NDAAs, and what's your time frame for getting a bill passed by both houses?
I am totally convinced we can get the bill back out of conference in July, and probably early July. There are not significant differences. Our reforms go quite a bit further than those in the House bill, but I have a very close working relationship with the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, and I'm confident we can resolve those differences and resolve them quickly.
Senator, are you confident you can get Chairman Thornberry to go along with your plan to put the services back in charge of their acquisition programs?
Well, I hope to make an argument that he could agree with, but I can't guarantee it, obviously. Congressman Thornberry Chairman Thornberry has a long and extensive experience, particularly at acquisition reform. So, but we are both in agreement that reform is badly needed when we look at these outrageous and disgraceful cost overruns.
They want to start budget negotiations next week. Do you think that you would be willing to talk about how OPA funding should be used and have these discussions now rather than in late September?
Well, obviously, a lot of that is up to our leadership, and you'd have to ask Senator McConnell, and Senator Blunt is here, obviously, and so, but I obviously am always, and I believe I speak for all of us, we are always open to conversations. We've been having conversations ever since the incredibly unthinkable sequestration came into being. But I think that there has to be certain ground rules. I think there has to be certain assumptions ahead of time. There are conversations going on all the time, as you know, about this issue. And I certainly don't like it on defense, but rather than have $38 or $39 billion less in defense authorization, I think it was very important that we use the OCO.
Thank you all.
Thank you.